He sat on my couch like he still belonged there. 3 years. 3 years since he walked out of this house with his suitcase and his 22-year-old girlfriend on his arm. 3 years since he told me I was too old, too boring, too focused on my silly little business ideas. And now here he was, Richard, my ex-husband, in an expensive suit I know he can't afford, sliding a leather folder across my coffee table. She stood behind him. Amber. Blonde hair cascading over her designer jacket, examining her perfectly manicured nails like this was just another tedious errand. My hands trembled. I pressed them against my lap where they couldn't see. Richard cleared his throat, that old gesture when he thought he was being important. I'm entitled to half the value of your company. Community property law. We were married when you started it, so technically, I built the foundation for your success. Before continuing, if this story is touching your heart, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, because every day I'm bringing you stories of women who turn their deepest pain into a new good way of living their lives. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Instead, I picked up the papers with steady fingers. Foundation? The foundation was me, alone in our garage at midnight, teaching myself to code while he slept. The foundation was him telling investors not to take me seriously. The foundation was him mocking my LLC paperwork over dinner. But I didn't say any of that. I looked at the documents. Legal jargon. Claims. Calculations of what he thought he deserved now that my company was going public on Nasdaq. Amber sighed loudly, impatient. Richard leaned forward, confident. Smug. I know this is difficult. But it's only fair. I supported you all those years. I met his eyes. Those eyes that once promised forever. That watched me cry when he left and felt nothing. And I smiled. Just a small smile. The kind he didn't understand yet. Because what Richard didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I'd been expecting him. 4 months. And I was ready. Stay with me. Because this is a story like no other story people tell around the internet. This is about how I reclaimed everything he tried to take from me, and found something far more valuable than he could ever understand. Let me take you back. Back before the courtroom, before the IPO, before Richard's panicked return with his legal papers and his desperate girlfriend. Back to when I was just another woman trying to make something of herself while the world told her she was already past her prime. 38 years. That's how long Richard and I were married. I met him when I was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in computer science that everyone said was unusual for a woman back then. He was charming, ambitious, working his way up in finance. We built a life together in Silicon Valley, in a modest house that we eventually upgraded as his career flourished. But somewhere along the way, my dreams got folded into his. He needed me to entertain his colleagues, to raise our 2 children, to manage the household while he climbed the corporate ladder. And I did it. I did it all because that's what you did when you loved someone, when you believed in partnership. But I never stopped thinking. Late at night, after the dinner dishes were cleared and the children were asleep and Richard was reviewing quarterly reports in his home office, I would sketch software architectures on graph paper. Ideas for platforms that could revolutionize how small businesses managed inventory, how they tracked customer relationships, how they scaled. At 59 years old, I enrolled in online coding courses. Richard laughed when he found out. My dear, you're going to learn to code? At your age? He said it kindly, like he was humoring a child with an impossible dream. I ignored him. Every night after he fell asleep, I moved to our garage. I set up a folding table, a second-hand computer, and I taught myself Python, JavaScript, SQL. My fingers cramped. My eyes burned from the screen's blue light. But I kept going. When I filed the LLC paperwork for my company, a business management software platform designed specifically for small and medium-sized enterprises, Richard found the documents on the kitchen counter. This is your retirement hobby? He held the papers like they were a community college pottery class registration. It's a business, I said quietly. He kissed my forehead. That's wonderful, dear. Just don't let it interfere with the investor dinner next Thursday. It wasn't wonderful to him. It was cute. Harmless. Something to keep me busy while he did real work. But I landed my first client. A local coffee shop that needed inventory management. Then a boutique fitness studio. Then a small accounting firm. Word spread slowly but steadily. There was this woman who understood what small businesses actually needed, who built software that was intuitive and affordable. I hired my first employee when I was 61. A brilliant young developer named Maya who believed in the vision. Richard didn't attend the small celebration I held in our backyard. He had a golf tournament. Then things changed. He started coming home later. Taking phone calls in the other room. His phone faced down on every surface. When I asked about his day, his answers grew vague, distracted. I told myself I was paranoid. We'd been married almost 4 decades. People went through phases. Marriages had seasons. I was presenting my software at a small business expo when I saw her. Amber. She was standing near the back of the room, gorgeous and young, laughing at something on her phone. Richard's assistant, though I'd never met her in person. She looked up and our eyes met. Something cold flickered across her face before she smiled and waved. 2 weeks later, Richard asked for a divorce. He sat me down in our living room, the same room where we'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays. "I've met someone," he said. "Someone who makes me feel alive again. You've been so focused on your little project that you haven't noticed we've grown apart." My little project. The business that was now generating 6 figures in revenue. The platform that had over 200 clients. The hobby that had actual employees and patents pending. He moved out that week. Moved in with Amber, who was 42 years younger than him, who posted their relationship all over social media like a trophy. Our children were devastated. Our friends didn't know whose side to take. The humiliation at family gatherings was suffocating. People whispered, pitied me. The poor woman, left for a younger model after giving him her best years. But one person stood beside me without hesitation. Michael. Richard's best friend since college. The man who'd been at our wedding, who'd held our babies, who'd been to every major milestone of our lives together. He called Richard the day he found out. I heard about it later, how Michael told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life, that he was throwing away someone extraordinary for shallow infatuation. Richard told him to mind his own business. Michael said he couldn't watch his best friend become someone he didn't recognize. Their 30-year friendship ended over me. Michael showed up at my house with moving boxes. He helped me pack Richard's remaining things. He sat with me on the nights I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. He listened to my business plans when everyone else told me to focus on healing first. "So you're going to let this break you? Or are you going to show him what you're really made of?" Michael asked one evening, sitting across from me in my kitchen. I didn't know. I was 62 years old. My marriage was over. My husband was flaunting his new relationship while I dealt with lawyer fees and divided assets and the pitying looks from our social circle. But Michael believed in me. He invested in my company. Not a pity investment, but a real one, after reviewing my business plan and financials. He introduced me to contacts in his network. He never once made me feel small. So I made a choice. I poured every ounce of my pain into building something that mattered. I worked 14-hour days. I refined the software. I pitched to investors who initially dismissed me because of my age and gender, then won them over with data and vision. While Richard posted vacation photos with Amber in Cabo, I was in boardrooms. While they attended parties and galas, I was debugging code at 2 a.m. While he lived his midlife crisis fantasy, I was building an empire. And Michael was there. Not pushing, not expecting anything, just present. We'd have dinner and talk about everything: business, life, books, dreams. He made me laugh when I'd forgotten how. He reminded me that I was more than what Richard had reduced me to. I started noticing things. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How he remembered small details I mentioned in passing. The quiet strength in his presence. But I pushed those feelings down. I couldn't think about that. Not yet. Not when I was barely holding myself together, not when I had a company to build, not when the ink on my divorce papers was barely dry. 18 months after Richard left, My company secured a major contract with a national retail chain. 6 months after that, we caught the attention of venture capital firms. And then came the offer that changed everything, an opportunity to go public on Nasdaq. I sat in the conference room with my leadership team, Maya, who'd been with me from nearly the beginning, and 6 others who believed in this vision. We'd done it. Against every odd, every dismissal, every moment I wanted to give up, we'd built something extraordinary. That night, I called Michael. We met at our usual coffee shop. We're going public, I told him. He smiled, that genuine smile that reached his eyes. Of course you are. You're the most brilliant person I know. Something shifted between us in that moment. A recognition. A possibility. But I had one more thing to prepare for. Because I knew, deep in my bones I knew. Because I knew, deep in my bones I knew, that the moment Richard heard about the IPO, he would come back. Not out of love. Not out of regret. Out of greed. That's when I called Patricia Chen. Her office was on the 42nd floor of a downtown San Francisco high-rise, all glass and steel and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from winning impossible cases. She sat across from me in a leather chair, her sharp eyes assessing me the way a surgeon might examine an X-ray. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the marriage, the abandonment, the company I built from nothing. I told her my fear, that Richard would claim community property rights, that because we were still married when I filed the LLC paperwork, he might have a legal claim to everything I'd sacrificed for. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. California is a community property state. Anything acquired during the marriage is typically considered joint property. But, and this is critical, there are exceptions. We need to establish that your company was built entirely independently of any marital assets or support. We need to prove he not only didn't help you, he actively hindered you. Can we do that? I asked. My voice sounded small even to my own ears. She smiled. A warrior's smile. If the evidence exists, we'll find it. But you need to be prepared for a fight. Men like your ex-husband don't give up easily when money is involved. I went home that night and opened my laptop. I started compiling everything. Every email Richard had sent during our marriage. Every text message I'd saved. Every financial transaction from our joint accounts. And there, buried in folders I'd almost forgotten about, I found them. Emails. Richard had sent messages to 3 of my early potential clients. People I'd been in conversations with, people who'd seemed interested in my software. The emails were carefully worded, casual, the kind of thing that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. "Hey Tom, Richard here. Listen, I know my wife reached out about her software project. Just wanted to give you a heads up, she's not really equipped to handle enterprise-level work. Lovely woman, but you know how it is. Don't want you to waste your time. Let me know if you need a real solution." I sat frozen, reading email after email. He'd sabotaged me. Deliberately. Systematically. I called Patricia at 11 p.m. She answered on the second ring. "I found something," I said. 3 days later, I sat in her office again. She'd gone through every piece of evidence I'd provided. Bank statements. Emails. Text messages. Business documents. "This is good. This is very good," Patricia said, spreading papers across her desk. "He didn't just fail to support your business, he actively undermined it. These emails alone could sink any claim he tries to make. But there's more we need to establish." "What?" I asked. "Where did your initial capital come from? Every penny you used to start the company, we need to trace it. If any of it came from marital funds, he'll argue that he contributed to the foundation of the business." "My mother," I said quietly. "When she passed away 7 years ago, she left me $75,000. Richard never even asked what I did with it. He was too busy with his own investments." Patricia's eyes lit up. "That's it. That's our foundation. Your mother's inheritance isn't community property. It's separate property that you then used to start your business. We need the documentation." I had it. All of it. The inheritance papers, the deposit records, the LLC formation documents showing that initial capital. But Patricia wasn't finished. There's something else we should investigate. Your ex-husband, what's his current financial situation? I don't know. We haven't spoken in almost 3 years. Patricia made a note. I'm going to have someone look into it. People don't suddenly resurface demanding money unless they need it. If we can establish that his motivation is purely financial desperation rather than any legitimate claim, it strengthens our position. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe. With your support, we can keep bringing more stories from powerful women that touch the heart of all of us. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me into her office with new information. Your ex-husband's investment firm is failing. He's hemorrhaging money. Made some bad bets on cryptocurrency and emerging markets. He's leveraged to the hilt, and his creditors are circling. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And Amber? Patricia slid a folder across her desk. Social media is a wonderful thing. She's been pressuring him for a lifestyle he can't afford. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, a BMW he leased under his name. She posted about wanting a bigger house just last month. She's spending money he doesn't have, I said. Exactly. And now your IPO announcement hit the tech news sites. Suddenly, his ex-wife is about to be worth millions. Maybe tens of millions. He thinks it's his salvation. Patricia nodded. We need to be strategic here. When he comes, and he will come, let him make his demands. Let him think he has leverage. The more confident he is, the more he'll overplay his hand. But through all of this, the preparation, the legal strategies, the evidence gathering, there was Michael. He'd become more than a friend, though neither of us had said it out loud yet. We'd have dinner twice a week, sometimes at his townhouse, sometimes at mine. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He made me laugh in ways I'd forgotten were possible. One evening, we were sitting on his back patio, drinking wine under string lights he'd hung himself. The conversation had drifted into comfortable silence when he spoke. I need to tell you something, Michael said, setting down his glass. My heart quickened. I've been in love with you for over a year. Maybe longer. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to complicate things while you were dealing with the divorce and building your company. I didn't want to be another person demanding something from you. I stared at him, this man who'd stood beside me when everyone else stepped away. Who'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. Who'd never asked for anything except my happiness. Michael, I whispered. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. Whether anything happens between us or not, I'll still be here. That won't change. But I did have something to say. I leaned across the small space between our chairs and kissed him. Gentle at first, then deeper, years of suppressed feeling finally finding release. When we pulled apart, he was smiling. That real smile that made his eyes crinkle. I've wanted to do that for so long, I admitted. Why didn't you? Because I was scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of making a mistake. Scared that what I was feeling wasn't real because I was vulnerable. And now? Now I realize that you're the least scary thing in my life. You're the safest person I know. We started seeing each other differently after that. Still carefully, still mindful of my healing process, but with an honesty that felt revolutionary. He'd come to my company headquarters and sit in on strategy meetings, offering insights from his own business experience. I'd go to his place and we'd cook dinner together, something Richard had never been interested in. But always, in the back of my mind, I was waiting. Waiting for Richard. Patricia had prepared me. We'd rehearsed different scenarios. She'd compiled all our evidence into a comprehensive file that would destroy any claim he tried to make. 3 months before the IPO was scheduled, it happened. I was at home, reviewing quarterly reports, when the doorbell rang. I looked through the window and saw him. Richard. Expensive suit, newly whitened teeth, the desperate edge of someone trying to look more successful than they were. And behind him, Amber, looking bored and checking her phone. I opened the door. We need to talk, Richard said, not even bothering with pleasantries. Come in, I said calmly, though my pulse was racing. That's when it happened, the scene I described at the beginning. Him sitting on my couch like he belonged there. The leather folder of legal documents. His arrogant claims about deserving half my company's value. But what I hadn't told you yet was what I knew in that moment. I knew about his failing business. I knew about Amber's expensive demands. I knew about the emails where he'd sabotaged me. I knew about my mother's inheritance that made the company entirely separate property. I knew that Patricia was waiting for my call with a strategy that would dismantle every argument he planned to make. And I knew something else, something that made me smile as I picked up his papers. I knew that Michael was waiting for me at his house with dinner, ready to celebrate whatever happened, ready to remind me that my worth had nothing to do with Richard's opinion or Richard's claims. I looked at Richard, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not as the man I'd loved for decades. Not as the husband who'd abandoned me. But as a small, desperate person who'd thrown away something real for something shiny and was now paying the price. "I'll have my lawyer review these," I said evenly. "You'll hear from her soon." Richard smiled, confident. "I think you'll find California law is very clear on community property. We were married when you started that little company. I'm entitled to half of everything." "We'll see," I said simply. After they left, Richard smug, Amber already back on her phone. I sat in my living room for a long moment. Then I called Patricia. "He came," I said. "Good. Now we go to war." The courthouse stood like a fortress of marble and glass in downtown San Francisco, its steps worn smooth by decades of people seeking justice. I climbed those steps with Patricia beside me, her briefcase heavy with evidence, and Michael a few paces behind, his quiet presence steadying my nerves. Inside, the hallways echoed with whispered conversations between lawyers and their clients, with the rustle of legal documents, with the weight of lives being decided. Richard was already there when we entered the courtroom. He sat at the plaintiff's table in what I recognized as a new suit, probably charged to a credit card he couldn't pay off. His lawyer, a slick-looking man in his 40s, was shuffling through papers with the kind of confidence that comes from winning similar cases before. And there was Amber, sitting in the gallery, perfectly manicured and looking at her phone, probably scrolling through luxury vacation destinations she expected to afford soon. The judge entered. Judge Margaret Morrison, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp, assessing eyes. Everyone stood. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying natural authority. Richard's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of community property rights. My client was married to the defendant for 38 years. During that marriage, she started a business, TechFlow Solutions, which is now valued at approximately $47 million and preparing for an initial public offering. California law is clear. Assets acquired during a marriage are community property, subject to equal division." He made it sound so simple. So reasonable. My client supported his wife throughout their marriage, providing the financial stability and household income that allowed her to pursue her entrepreneurial interests. He is entitled to his fair share of the marital assets, which includes 50% of the company's current and future value. Patricia stood, smooth and controlled. "Your Honor, if I may. This case is far from straightforward. The defendant built her company entirely independently, using separate property funds, and not only without her ex-husband's support, but despite his active sabotage. We will demonstrate that Mr. Harrison has no legitimate claim to any portion of TechFlow Solutions." The judge made a note. "Proceed with your case," she said to Richard's lawyer. Richard took the stand first. He looked confident, practiced. His lawyer walked him through the narrative they'd prepared. "Mr. Harrison, how long were you married to the defendant?" 38 years. "We built a life together. I worked in finance, provided a steady income, supported our family. And during those years, did you encourage your wife's business interests?" Richard nodded earnestly. "Absolutely. I always told her to pursue her passions. When she mentioned wanting to start a software company, I told her it was a wonderful idea. I provided the stable home environment that allowed her to take that risk." I felt my jaw clench. Patricia touched my arm gently, a reminder to stay calm. "Did you contribute financially to the household during the period when she was building her company?" "Yes, of course. My income paid our mortgage, our bills, our living expenses. That freed her up to invest time and resources into her business without worrying about our financial stability. He was good. I had to admit that. He was painting himself as the supportive husband, the foundation that made everything possible. Patricia stood for cross-examination. Her posture was relaxed, but I could see the predator in her eyes. Mr. Harrison, you said you encouraged your wife's business. Can you tell the court specifically what you did to support TechFlow Solutions? Richard shifted slightly. Well, like I said, I provided financial stability. I encouraged her. I believed in her. Did you invest any money in the company? He hesitated. No, but did you introduce her to potential clients or investors? Not directly, no, but did you assist with any technical aspects of the business? Marketing? Operations? Administrative work? I had my own career. I supported her in other ways. Patricia nodded slowly. Let me show you something, Mr. Harrison. This is an email you sent to Thomas Chen on March 15, 2022. Can you read the highlighted portion for the court? She handed him a document. I watched the color drain from Richard's face. He read, his voice flat. Hey Tom, Richard here. Listen, I know my wife reached out about her software project. Just wanted to give you a heads up, she's not really equipped to handle enterprise-level work. Lovely woman, but you know how it is. Don't want you to waste your time. The courtroom was silent. Does that sound like encouragement to you, Mr. Harrison? I was trying to protect him from. Protect him? Or protect your wife from succeeding? Patricia's voice was surgical. Let me show you 2 more emails. This one to Jennifer Matthews, discouraging her from working with TechFlow. This one to David Park, suggesting he look elsewhere for software solutions. All sent while your wife was desperately trying to build her client base. Richard's lawyer objected. Your Honor, these emails show concern, not sabotage. Judge Morrison looked at the documents. Overruled. I'd like to hear the explanation. Patricia continued. Mr. Harrison, when did you file for divorce? About 3 years ago. And why? Richard glanced at Amber in the gallery. We'd grown apart. I wanted different things. You left your wife for Ms. Winters, who is sitting in the gallery, correct? Yes. And during your marriage, did you ever know about an inheritance your wife received from her mother? Richard frowned. No. I don't recall that. Patricia pulled out more documents. Mrs. Helen Patterson, the defendant's mother, passed away in 2018, leaving her daughter $75,000. Here's the death certificate, the will, the bank deposit records. Your wife used that inheritance, her separate property, as the sole capital to start TechFlow Solutions. Not a single dollar of community funds was used. The judge leaned forward, interested now. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have bank statements showing that Mr. Harrison withdrew $15,000 from their joint account without his wife's knowledge during the business formation period, forcing her to repay critical vendor invoices from her separate inheritance funds. Richard's lawyer was scrambling through his papers, looking for a counter-argument. Mr. Harrison, Patricia said, turning back to him. What is your current financial situation? That's not relevant. Your Honor, it's absolutely relevant. It speaks to his motivation for this lawsuit. The judge nodded. Answer the question, Mr. Harrison. Richard's face was red now. I'm going through a temporary financial challenge. Some investments haven't performed as expected. Your firm lost $2.3 million in cryptocurrency speculation in 2024, correct? That was a market downturn. And you currently have 3 credit cards that are maxed out, totaling $127,000 in debt? Richard didn't answer. And Ms. Winters has been posting on social media about wanting a larger house, a European vacation, and most recently, a Tesla Model X. All expensive requests for a man in your financial position. Objection. Richard's lawyer stood. This is character assassination. It's establishing motive, Patricia countered. My client built a company worth millions despite her ex-husband's sabotage, using her own separate property funds. He showed no interest in that company until it became valuable. Now he's drowning in debt and sees this as his salvation. Judge Morrison looked at Richard with something that might have been disappointment. "Step down, Mr. Harrison." Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the stand on shaking legs. Patricia smiled at me encouragingly. She asked me to describe my journey. Building the company alone. Teaching myself to code at 59. Working through the grief of my mother's death and my marriage's failure. Discovering Richard's sabotage emails only months ago. "When you found those emails, how did you feel?" Patricia asked. I paused, remembering that night. Betrayed. But also, validated. I'd always wondered why some of those early prospects had vanished without explanation. Finding out my own husband had undermined me. It hurt, but it also explained so much. Did you use any marital funds to start or grow TechFlow Solutions? No. Every penny came from my mother's inheritance or from revenue the company generated. I kept meticulous records specifically because I was afraid of something like this happening. Richard's lawyer tried to shake me on cross-examination, suggesting I must have benefited from the marital home's equity, from the stability Richard provided, from the community property that supported me. But I held firm. I paid half the mortgage from my own earnings. I cooked our meals, managed our household, and still found time to build a business. Richard provided no support, financial, emotional, or practical, to TechFlow Solutions. In fact, his actions cost me clients and nearly destroyed my business before it could grow. Then Michael took the stand. He'd been Richard's best friend for 30 years. His testimony carried weight. "Mr. Chun, you were present during many conversations between the plaintiff and defendant during their marriage. Can you describe Mr. Harrison's attitude toward his wife's business?" Michael's voice was steady but sad. Richard mocked it constantly. He called it her little hobby. He told me privately that he hoped she'd lose interest once she realized how hard real business was. He never took it seriously. And after their separation, Michael looked directly at Richard. I told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. That he was leaving the most remarkable woman I'd ever known for someone who only cared about his money. He told me to stay out of it. We haven't spoken since. The judge was watching this exchange carefully. Patricia's final move was devastating. She presented a financial analysis showing that not only had Richard contributed nothing to TechFlow Solutions, but that the company's major growth had occurred entirely after their separation, meaning any community property claims were even weaker. "Your Honor," Patricia concluded, "this is not a complicated case, despite plaintiff's attempts to make it so. The defendant used separate property inheritance funds to start her business. Her ex-husband actively sabotaged that business during their marriage. All significant growth occurred after separation. Mr. Harrison has no legitimate claim. This lawsuit is nothing more than a desperate attempt to profit from a success he tried to prevent." Richard's lawyer made his closing argument, but it sounded hollow now, grasping at straws about community property principles without addressing the evidence Patricia had presented. Judge Morrison didn't even take a recess to deliberate. "I've heard enough. Having reviewed the evidence and testimony, I find that TechFlow Solutions was started with separate property funds and built without any material contribution from Mr. Harrison. In fact, the evidence shows he actively hindered the business's development. I find no basis for a community property claim. Furthermore, I'm ordering Mr. Harrison to pay the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $47,000, plus $25,000 in compensatory damages for the business interference evidenced by those emails." The gavel fell. Richard sat frozen. Amber was already standing, grabbing her purse, her face twisted with anger. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were relief. Vindication. Freedom. Outside the courthouse, Richard tried one last manipulation. He followed me down the steps, his voice desperate. "Please. I made a mistake. I still love you. We could try again." I turned to face him. For the first time in our entire relationship, I saw him clearly. A small man. A weak man. Someone who'd thrown away something real because he couldn't see its value until someone else recognized it. "I don't think you ever loved me, Richard. I think you loved what I did for you. And when I started doing something for myself, you couldn't handle it. I walked past him to where Michael waited, his hand extended toward mine. And I never looked back. 6 months later, I stood at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square, my hand on the button that would ring the opening bell. The moment felt surreal. TechFlow Solutions was going public. Behind me stood my team, Maya, who'd been with me from nearly the beginning, and the brilliant engineers, marketers, and operations specialists who'd believed in this vision. Elena, my neighbor who'd brought me coffee on the worst days. Patricia, who'd fought for me in that courtroom with precision and fierce loyalty. And Michael. Always Michael, standing just to my left, his presence steady and grounding. My children were there too, their faces glowing with pride. They'd watched me rebuild myself from the ruins of a failed marriage, watched me turn pain into purpose. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. Devastated. Humiliated. Convinced her best years were behind her. That woman had taught herself to code in a garage, ignored the mockery, pushed through the sabotage, and built something extraordinary. 3, 2, 1. I pressed the button. The bell rang out across the trading floor. Applause erupted around me. TechFlow Solutions opened at $23 per share and climbed steadily throughout the day, eventually closing at $31. My stake in the company was now worth $52 million. But the number wasn't what mattered. What mattered was standing in that moment, surrounded by people who'd supported me, knowing I'd earned every single dollar through my own brilliance, my own perseverance, my own refusal to be diminished. Later, at the celebration dinner, Michael raised his glass. To the most remarkable woman I know. Who turned betrayal into triumph and never forgot who she was in the process. Everyone cheered. I felt tears on my cheeks again, but these were different from the tears I'd cried in that courtroom. These were joy. I heard through mutual friends that Richard's business had eventually failed completely. That Amber had left him for a tech entrepreneur she'd met at a charity gala. Someone with actual money, not just the illusion of it. That he'd had to sell the condo he'd bought with her and move into a modest apartment. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. No vindication. Just distance. He was a chapter of my life that had closed, and I had no desire to reread it. The real victory wasn't defeating Richard in court, though that had been necessary. The real victory was discovering that I'd never needed him at all. That every strength I'd attributed to our partnership had actually been mine alone. That the woman who'd subordinated her dreams for 38 years had always been capable of extraordinary things. Michael and I took things slowly, building something real. We traveled together, not to flashy destinations for social media photos, but to places we genuinely wanted to explore. We cooked elaborate dinners in his kitchen and laughed at our failures. We talked about everything, the kind of deep conversations I'd never had with Richard because he'd never truly been interested in my thoughts. One evening, about 8 months after the IPO, we were sitting on my back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" Michael asked. "All those years with him?" I considered the question. No. Because those years led me here. They taught me what I didn't want, what I wouldn't accept, what I was capable of surviving. Richard's betrayal freed me to discover who I really am. Michael took my hand. "And who are you?" "I'm a woman who builds things," I said. "Who creates solutions. Who refuses to be small just because someone else needs me to be. I'm 65 years old and I'm just getting started." He kissed me then, soft and certain, and I felt something I'd never felt with Richard, genuinely seen. Genuinely valued. Not for what I could do for him, but for who I actually was. My company continued to grow. We acquired 2 smaller competitors. We expanded into international markets. Forbes wrote a feature about me titled, "The Woman Who Started a Tech Empire at 62." But my favorite moments weren't the magazine covers or the board meetings. They were the emails I received from other women. Women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who said my story had inspired them to start their own businesses, to leave toxic relationships, to believe they still had time to become who they were meant to be. That's what mattered. Not the money. Not the revenge. The proof that it's never too late to reclaim yourself. I still drive past the old house sometimes, the one Richard and I shared for decades. A young family lives there now. I see their children playing in the yard, and I feel nothing but peace. That house belonged to a different version of me, one who didn't know her own strength yet. Now I live in a modern townhouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a home office where I work on new projects. Michael has his own key. My children visit regularly, bringing my grandchildren who love to help me with coding projects on colorful children's programming software. This is what justice looks like, I've learned. Not the courtroom verdict, though that mattered. Not Richard's financial collapse, though that was inevitable. Justice is waking up every morning knowing you're living authentically. Justice is building something meaningful with your own hands. Justice is loving and being loved for who you truly are. If this story moved you, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. I'm sure you'll be surprised by this new emotional and heartbreaking story I have right here to tell you.